The entire auditorium was cheering for me when I looked backstage and saw my roommate kissing the boy she knew I'd been in love with for almost a year. I don't mean flirting with him. I don't mean standing too close to him at some party or laughing a little too hard at his jokes. I mean her hands were wrapped around the back of his neck while he stood there looking confused and surprised, and she was staring directly at me over his shoulder like she'd been waiting for that exact moment all night. And the worst part is that even then, standing under hot stage lights with half the school chanting my name after the performance of my life, some part of me still tried to make excuses for her. That's the embarrassing thing about betrayal when it comes from someone you've spent months protecting. Your first instinct isn't anger. It's confusion. Your brain starts searching desperately for an explanation kinder than the truth. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Lily Carter. I was 20 years old, majoring in music performance, the kind of girl professors described as reliable in recommendation letters because I showed up early, answered emails too fast, and apologized whenever anyone else was uncomfortable. I wasn't one of those effortlessly cool girls everyone noticed the second they entered a room. Most people remembered me because I made them feel calm. I sang at campus events, helped freshmen find classrooms when they got lost during orientation, called my parents almost every night, and cried embarrassingly hard during movies involving old people or dogs. My life wasn't glamorous, but it felt safe. Stable. I had close friends, a family that loved me loudly, and this naive belief that if you treated people gently enough, eventually they would treat you gently back. Vanessa was the first person who made me realize some people don't experience kindness as kindness. They experience it as access. Her name was Vanessa. We met during sophomore year when the housing office accidentally assigned us to the same dorm after some administrative mess with room availability. I was supposed to be living with my friend Chloe in Maple Hall, but there had been a pipe burst over the summer and half the floor got relocated 3 days before move-in. Vanessa arrived carrying one suitcase that looked too expensive for someone who kept apologizing for being basically broke all the time. That should have been my first clue, honestly, but people ignore strange details when someone cries in front of them during the first 10 minutes of meeting them. She cried while unpacking a desk lamp. Not dramatically, quietly. The kind of crying that makes you uncomfortable because it feels too personal to witness. I remember standing there holding a pack of command hooks while she wiped her face and laughed softly, like she was embarrassed by herself. She said college had been harder than she expected. Said her parents weren't helping financially anymore, and she was trying to manage everything alone. She had this way of speaking that made every sentence sound fragile, like if life pushed even slightly harder, she might fall apart completely. I liked her immediately. That's the part one hates admitting now because people always act smarter after the story is over. They say things like, I would have seen the signs, or she sounds obviously manipulative, but she didn't. Not at first. At first, she sounded lonely. There's a difference. I grew up in a loud family in Northern California, where nobody stayed upset quietly for very long. My mom was a middle school counselor who believed every problem became smaller if you dragged it into the kitchen and talked about it over food. My dad coached Little League even after my younger brother quit baseball because he liked helping nervous kids feel less nervous. Our house was the kind where people accidentally stayed for dinner because my mother physically could not let anyone leave hungry. Friends used to joke that my parents collected teenagers emotionally. There was always somebody sleeping on our couch after a breakup or eating leftovers at our counter after practice. Vanessa noticed that almost immediately. Noticed and studied it. At the time I thought she was just touched by it. Looking back now, I think she was fascinated. During the first few weeks of school, she started sitting near me constantly. In class. In the dining hall. In the library. Sometimes I'd look up from my laptop and realize she'd been watching me for several seconds before saying anything. Not in a creepy way exactly. More like she was trying to figure something out. She asked a lot of questions about my family. What did we do for holidays? Did my parents really still call every night? Was my younger brother actually funny, or was I exaggerating? Did my parents ever yell? Did I ever feel pressured by them? At the time those questions seemed normal. We were 19. Everyone in college was comparing childhoods without realizing they were doing it. The first weird moment happened in October during midterms. I came back to the dorm around 1 in the morning after studying with friends and found Vanessa asleep at my desk wearing my sweatshirt. My laptop was open beside her, and one of my family photos was pulled up on the screen. Not even a recent one. An old Christmas picture from high school. I remember standing there for a second just looking at her because something about the scene felt oddly intimate and invasive at the same time. She woke up suddenly and apologized over and over, saying she'd only borrowed the sweatshirt because the room was cold and she'd been trying to remember whether she'd submitted an assignment on Canvas. Then she looked at the photo, still open on the screen, and smiled in this strange, wistful way. "You all look so happy," she said quietly. I remember laughing a little because I didn't know what else to say. That's because my dad had just burned the turkey like 20 minutes before that picture. But she kept staring at it. "Still," she said, "you can tell people actually want to be there." At 19 years old, you don't recognize lines like that as warning signs. You think they're just sad observations from someone having a hard time adjusting. By November, she'd started getting headaches constantly. At least that's what she told me. They always seemed to appear right before assignment deadlines or presentations. She'd press her fingers against her temple and whisper that she hadn't slept properly in days because of stress and chronic migraines. Once she even let herself slide dramatically against the wall outside our economics lecture, like she was about to faint. I skipped my own presentation rehearsal to walk her back to the dorm because she looked genuinely pale. She thanked me 3 separate times on the walk home. That became another pattern eventually. Vanessa thanked people too much. Not in a sweet way. In a calculated way. Like she understood gratitude made people feel noble. She made helping her feel emotionally rewarding. One night near Thanksgiving break, I found her crying quietly in the communal bathroom. She said she couldn't afford a flight home and didn't want to spend the holiday alone on campus. My mother overheard me talking about it during our nightly phone call and immediately insisted Vanessa come home with us. She didn't even hesitate. "Nobody spends Thanksgiving alone," my mom said, like she was announcing a law of nature. Vanessa started crying again when I told her. That Thanksgiving should probably bother me more in retrospect than it does. It's one of those memories that feels poisoned now even though it was genuinely warm while it was happening. My family loved her almost immediately. My mother kept sneaking extra pie onto her plate because Vanessa always acted startled whenever somebody did something kind for her. My dad spent an hour teaching her how to properly hold a pool cue in the garage, while she laughed harder at his jokes than anybody else ever did. My younger brother Tyler called her dorm girl for 3 straight days because he couldn't remember her name, and she somehow found that charming instead of annoying. I remember waking up the morning after Thanksgiving and hearing voices downstairs. Vanessa and my mother were sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee while sunlight came through the windows. They looked weirdly comfortable together, like they'd known each other longer than 48 hours. My mother looked up when I walked in. "Vanessa was just telling me how lucky we are to have you." I laughed and grabbed orange juice from the fridge. "That sounds fake." "No," Vanessa said softly. "I mean it." And maybe she did. Maybe that's what makes people dangerous sometimes. They aren't always lying about every emotion. Sometimes they really do admire you while they're destroying you. After Thanksgiving, she started copying little things about me. At first, it was harmless enough that I barely noticed. She bought the same vanilla perfume I used because she said she liked how it smelled in the room. Then she started wearing her hair the same way I did during finals week, messy claw clips and oversized sweaters. Once Chloe joked that Vanessa sounded exactly like me during class discussions now because she'd started using the same phrases I used without realizing it. Vanessa laughed too hard at that joke. Hard enough that everyone else got awkward. There were other moments. Small ones. Easy to dismiss individually. I'd tell a story at dinner and she'd retell it later like it happened to both of us. She started inserting herself into FaceTime calls with my parents without waiting to be invited. My mother didn't mind because my mother genuinely liked taking care of people, but I remember one night calling home and hearing Vanessa's voice in the background before she even noticed I was awake. "Oh my God," she laughed when she saw me standing there. "Your mom was just showing me baby pictures of you." Something tightened in my stomach then. Just briefly. But again, I ignored it. That's another thing people misunderstand about manipulation. It rarely feels evil while it's happening. Mostly it feels confusing. Mostly it feels like tiny moments of discomfort you keep talking yourself out of because acknowledging them fully would make you sound paranoid. Then came the assignments. Vanessa switched majors halfway through sophomore year and suddenly started struggling in classes she claimed she barely understood. She'd sit cross-legged on my bed at 2 in the morning staring miserably at spreadsheets or essay prompts while saying things like, "You're so much smarter than me," or "I genuinely don't know how your brain works." The compliments embarrassed me enough that I usually ended up helping longer than I intended. Helping slowly became doing. At first it was proofreading, then outlining, then "Can you just explain how you structured yours?" Then entire sections written by me because she said her migraines were getting worse. One night, she curled up under a blanket looking exhausted while I finished a marketing analysis paper for her at my desk. I remember glancing over at her sleeping face and actually feeling protective. Protective. Like I was taking care of someone fragile. A week later, she got a higher grade than I did. She cried when she found out. Not because she felt guilty. Because she said nobody had ever supported her the way I did before. I wish I could explain how effective that kind of thing is when you're young and want desperately to believe you're a good person. Every time I started feeling uneasy about how dependent she'd become, she'd say something emotional enough to pull me right back in. She had this ability to make boundaries feel cruel. Around February, she started talking to Ethan. I should probably explain Ethan carefully because people always simplify crushes afterward like they're either shallow or obsessive. Mine wasn't either. Ethan worked backstage for the campus music department and played guitar badly in a way I found weirdly charming. He wore old band hoodies constantly and had a habit of rubbing the back of his neck when he got nervous. We met after one of my performances at an open mic event near campus. He stayed afterward helping stack chairs while I packed up equipment, and somehow we ended up talking for almost 2 hours about terrible childhood music tastes. I didn't tell Vanessa immediately. Not because I didn't trust her then. I think some part of me just wanted one thing that belonged only to me. But eventually she figured it out because she figured out everything. She noticed I spent longer getting ready before music club meetings. She noticed I smiled at my phone more often. She noticed Ethan's name appearing in conversation casually. And once she noticed, she became interested in him too. Not obviously. Not enough for me to accuse her of anything. She just started appearing places more often. If Ethan and I were talking after rehearsal, suddenly Vanessa needed to drop something off nearby. If he complimented my performance, she'd laugh and say things like, "You should hear her practicing at 2 in the morning. It's terrifying in there." Small comments. Tiny humiliations wrapped in jokes. Then one night Ethan came to our dorm to help me rehearse for spring festival auditions. Vanessa opened the door before I could and spent the first 10 minutes acting flustered and apologetic because she'd supposedly just gotten out of the shower. Her hair wasn't wet. I noticed that immediately. But she smiled shyly enough that I convinced myself I was overthinking it. The three of us practiced together for a while before she suddenly excused herself because of another migraine. Ethan waited until her door closed before looking at me strangely. "Does your roommate always watch you like that?" he asked. I laughed because the question caught me off guard. "Watch me like what?" He hesitated. "Never mind." But he looked uncomfortable for the rest of the night. Things got worse after spring break. Vanessa started calling my mother without me sometimes. Not often. Just enough that I noticed accidentally. Once I walked into the room and heard her laughing quietly while folding laundry. "No, she barely sleeps lately," she was saying. "I'm honestly a little worried about her." She jumped when she saw me. "Oh my God," she said quickly. "Your mom called asking about your schedule." Something about the explanation felt slippery. Later that night, my mother texted me asking if I was eating enough. I stared at the message for a long time. The strange thing is I still wasn't angry then. Mostly I felt tired. Like reality around Vanessa required constant emotional recalculating. Every interaction left me slightly unsure of myself. Then came the first real crack in the illusion. It happened on a Saturday afternoon in April. Vanessa told me she was visiting her aunt off campus because she needed a break from dorm life. I stayed behind finishing rehearsal prep for the spring festival because auditions were only 2 weeks away. Around 7 that evening, Chloe burst into our room looking confused. "Since when does your roommate own a Range Rover?" I looked up from my laptop. "What?" "I just saw her downtown getting out of one with some older couple." I laughed automatically because the statement sounded ridiculous. "You probably saw someone else." "No," Chloe said slowly. "I definitely didn't." Then she described the couple. Perfectly. I felt this strange cold flicker move through my stomach. Still, I made excuses immediately. Maybe they were relatives. Maybe she borrowed the car. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. When Vanessa returned that night, she was carrying shopping bags from stores she definitely couldn't afford based on everything she'd told me about money. She saw me noticing the bags and froze almost imperceptibly before smiling. "My aunt forced me to let her buy clothes," she said quickly. "She feels guilty because my parents are helping my brother more than me financially." The explanation came too fast. Like she'd prepared it in the elevator. I remember staring at her for a second longer than normal. Long enough for her smile to tighten slightly around the edges. Then she laughed softly and tossed one of the sweaters onto my bed. "You can borrow that if you want," she said. "It'd look cute on you." That was the moment something shifted. Not completely. Not enough to fully understand her yet. But enough that I stopped feeling guilty every time discomfort crawled up my spine around her. Enough that I finally started noticing how often every conversation somehow bent back toward sympathy for Vanessa. Enough that I started replaying old moments differently in my head. The headaches. The tears. The helplessness. The constant emergencies right before deadlines. The way she inserted herself into my family's affection so naturally it almost looked accidental. And maybe the thing that unsettled me most was realizing I couldn't tell anymore how much of her personality was real. A few nights later, I woke up around 2 in the morning because I heard her talking quietly on the phone near the window. At first, I wasn't even paying attention. Then I heard her laugh. Not her soft, fragile laugh. A different one. Sharper. Colder somehow. "I know," she said. "She literally does everything for me." Silence. Then another laugh. "No, she still thinks I'm broke." Something in my chest dropped hard enough to wake me fully. I stayed perfectly still in bed listening to her pace slowly near the window. "I'm telling you, these people are insane," she said. "Her family practically adopted me after one holiday." Another pause. Then the sentence I still think about sometimes when I can't sleep. "It's actually kind of funny how easy it is to become someone's favorite person if you just act like they saved your life." I remember staring at the dark underside of my bunk bed feeling suddenly cold everywhere. Not angry yet. Not even heartbroken exactly. Mostly embarrassed. Embarrassed in that deep, nauseating way that only comes from realizing you misunderstood an entire person while they understood you perfectly the whole time. Vanessa turned then and noticed me awake. For half a second, neither of us moved. Then her expression softened instantly into concern, so convincing it almost made me doubt what I'd heard. "Did I wake you?" she whispered gently. And that was the first moment in our entire friendship that I looked at her and genuinely didn't know who I was looking at anymore. I didn't answer her question right away. I just looked at her standing there near the window with her phone still in her hand and moonlight catching one side of her face while the other stayed hidden in shadow. It sounds dramatic describing it now like that, but memory does strange things after somebody hurts you. It turns ordinary moments cinematic. At the time, all I knew was that something inside me had shifted quietly and permanently. Like hearing a crack inside a wall you'd trusted for years. You might not know how bad the damage is yet, but you know the structure isn't safe anymore. "Just tired," I said finally. She watched me for another second. Too long. Then she smiled softly and climbed back into bed without another word. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, Vanessa acted exactly the same as always. That might have been the creepiest part. She woke up complaining about a headache and asked if I could grab her coffee before my morning class because she felt kind of faint again. She sat cross-legged on her bed wrapped in one of my sweaters while sunlight came through the blinds, and if somebody had walked into the room right then they would have thought she was the vulnerable one. They would have looked at me standing there holding my backpack and thought I was lucky to have such a sweet, emotionally open roommate. I brought her the coffee. That's the embarrassing truth. Even after hearing her mock me on the phone, I still brought her coffee because part of me kept trying to fit what I'd heard into a version of Vanessa that made sense. People don't like admitting this, but betrayal almost never destroys trust immediately. First, it creates exhaustion. Your brain keeps trying to reconcile two different realities at once. The person who cried in your kitchen during Thanksgiving. The person laughing on the phone about manipulating your family. The person who held your hand during panic attacks before performances. The person who studied your life closely enough to imitate it. For about a week, I convinced myself maybe I'd misunderstood the conversation. Then things started unraveling faster. Vanessa became more affectionate after that night, not less. She started hugging me randomly while thanking me for things. Started calling me my actual soulmate whenever I helped her with assignments. Started telling people publicly how much she appreciated me. It felt strangely strategic now that I was paying attention. Like she sensed distance forming and was trying to close it before I fully recognized it myself. One afternoon, Chloe cornered me outside the student union and asked if Vanessa was okay. I remember blinking at her. Why? She cried in front of like 6 people during marketing today, Chloe said carefully. Said she was scared you were mad at her. That stopped me cold. What? Chloe shifted uncomfortably. She said you've been emotionally distant lately and she didn't know what she did wrong. I stared at her for several seconds without speaking because suddenly dozens of tiny interactions over the last few months rearranged themselves in my head into something uglier. Vanessa wasn't just becoming close to people around me. She was controlling the emotional narrative before I even knew there was one. I'm not mad at her, I said finally, though my voice sounded uncertain even to me. Chloe hesitated. Okay, it's just, I don't know. Sometimes she talks about you like you're her older sister or something. That sentence bothered me the entire walk back to the dorm. When I opened the door, Vanessa was sitting on my bed scrolling through her phone while wearing another one of my hoodies. She looked up immediately and smiled. There you are. Your mom texted me asking if you're coming home in May after finals. I stopped walking. My mom texted you? She looked confused by my tone. Yeah, she said you weren't answering. I checked my phone. 3 missed texts from my mother from less than an hour earlier. Something about that made my chest tighten painfully. Not because my mother had done anything wrong. My mother texted everyone. That was who she was. But suddenly it felt like Vanessa existed inside parts of my life that were supposed to belong only to me. Like she'd slipped quietly into spaces I hadn't realized needed protecting. That night I called my mother from outside the dorm building because I didn't want Vanessa overhearing the conversation. You like her a lot, huh? I asked casually after a few minutes. My mother laughed softly. Vanessa? Of course I do. Honey, that girl adores you. I leaned against the brick wall outside while students crossed campus around me carrying takeout bags and backpacks. Do you ever think she's intense? There was a pause. What do you mean? I don't know, I said quickly. Never mind. But my mother didn't let things go easily. Did something happen? And there it was. The moment. The opening. I could have told her then. I could have repeated exactly what I heard on the phone. I could have admitted how strange things had started feeling. Instead, I laughed quietly and changed the subject because saying it out loud would have made everything real. People underestimate how long human beings will tolerate discomfort if the alternative is admitting someone close to them isn't who they pretended to be. Around that same time, Ethan started acting differently around Vanessa too. More cautious. Less relaxed. One evening after rehearsal, he offered to walk me back to the dorm because campus had gotten weirdly empty after rainstorms lately. We were halfway across the quad when he shoved his hands into his hoodie pockets and asked, "Can I ask you something without sounding insane?" I laughed. Depends how insane. He looked embarrassed suddenly. Does Vanessa dislike you? I actually stopped walking. What? She says weird things sometimes, he said carefully. And I honestly can't tell if she's joking. A cold feeling spread slowly through my stomach. What kind of things? Ethan hesitated again, like he regretted bringing it up already. Mostly little comments. Like saying you're kind of selfish underneath everything. Or that you make people feel obligated to take care of you emotionally. For a second, I genuinely thought he had to be misunderstanding her. Because selfish? Me? I was writing her assignments, buying her groceries, letting her wear my clothes, introducing her to my family, helping her through every invented crisis she manufactured. And suddenly I remembered her voice on the phone. It's actually kind of funny how easy it is to become someone's favorite person if you just act like they saved your life. Ethan looked uncomfortable watching my face change. Maybe I'm taking it wrong, he said quickly. I just thought you should know. No, I said quietly. You were right to tell me. The strange thing is I still didn't fully hate her then. I need people to understand that because stories like this sound simpler in retrospect than they feel while you're trapped inside them. Vanessa wasn't cruel every second of every day. Sometimes she was genuinely funny. Sometimes she stayed up with me while I practiced guitar until 2 in the morning. Sometimes she remembered tiny details about my life so carefully it felt flattering. Human beings are complicated enough that even manipulative people can still make you feel loved occasionally. Maybe especially manipulative people. A few days later, she got sick again. Or claimed she did. It happened 3 nights before our communications final project was due. She came back to the dorm pale and shaky, saying she thought she needed urgent care because her chest felt tight and she couldn't stop trembling. I remember helping her sit down while she cried quietly into her hands. Then she whispered that she was terrified of hospitals because of childhood medical trauma. By midnight, I was the one finishing both our presentation slides while she lay in bed breathing weakly and apologizing every few minutes for being such a burden. At 1 in the morning, I got up to refill my water bottle from the communal kitchen. When I came back, Vanessa was sitting upright laughing at something on her phone. Not weak. Not trembling. Laughing. The second she saw me standing there, her entire body language changed. Shoulders drooping. Expression exhausted. You okay? I asked slowly. She touched her chest immediately. Still hurts a little. I nodded once and sat back down at my desk, but something inside me had started hardening by then. Quietly. Like concrete setting. The next day, she got an extension from our professor because of her medical episode. That afternoon, I accidentally saw her sprinting across campus, trying not to miss a coffee order before pickup closed. Sprint. No chest pain apparently. That should have been enough for me. Honestly, it should have. But people who manipulate emotionally don't survive by lying badly. They survive by mixing truth into fiction strategically. Vanessa probably did have anxiety sometimes. She probably did feel insecure. That's what made everything harder to untangle. There was always just enough real vulnerability mixed into the performance to make me feel cruel for doubting her. Then came my birthday. I almost wish it hadn't because that's the memory that still makes me feel stupidest. My parents drove down to campus for the weekend and surprised me by taking me, Tyler, Vanessa, and a few friends out to dinner at this little Italian restaurant downtown that I'd loved since freshman year. Vanessa spent the entire evening glowing under their attention. My dad kept refilling her wine glass because she laughed at every terrible story he told. My mother asked about her classes, and Vanessa answered with this humble self-deprecating warmth that made everybody around her instinctively protective. At one point, I came back from the bathroom and stopped short because Vanessa was showing my mother photos on her phone. Photos of me. Not recent ones. Old candid pictures she'd apparently been taking for months without me noticing. Me asleep at my desk. Me practicing guitar. Me cooking ramen at 2 in the morning. She's adorable when she doesn't realize anyone's looking, Vanessa was saying softly. Everybody laughed. I laughed too because what else was I supposed to do? Tell my family it suddenly felt like my roommate had been documenting me like some kind of personal research project? Later that night after dinner, my mother hugged Vanessa goodbye before hugging me. Take care of each other, she said warmly. The words sat wrong in my chest all the way back to campus. A few days later, Ethan invited me to help set up equipment for spring festival rehearsals because one of the audio coordinators canceled last minute. We spent almost 4 hours together carrying amps across the auditorium stage and arguing about music choices while terrible fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. It was one of the first genuinely easy nights I'd had in weeks. No emotional calculations. No careful conversations. Just laughter and music and Ethan bumping his shoulder lightly against mine whenever I teased him. At one point he looked over while I was tuning my guitar and smiled in this quiet, distracted way that made my entire body warm. "You know," he said casually, "I think you're the only person on campus who apologizes after winning arguments." I laughed. "That's because I enjoy being correct gracefully." That's exactly what I mean. I don't know how to explain this properly, but after months of feeling emotionally crowded by Vanessa, being around Ethan felt spacious somehow. Like I could exist naturally again instead of monitoring every interaction constantly. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. "Are you with Ethan RN?" Smiley face. I stared at the message longer than necessary. How did she know? I hadn't told her where I was. Something cold slid quietly through me again. When I got back to the dorm later that night, she was sitting cross-legged on her bed eating strawberries from a plastic container while watching TikTok videos. She looked up immediately. "How was rehearsal?" Normal question. Casual tone. But suddenly every conversation with her felt layered now. "Good," I said carefully. "I'm glad." She smiled lightly. "Ethan seems really into you." I felt my pulse jump unexpectedly. "What makes you say that?" She shrugged. "Just the way he looks at you." Then she smiled again, softer this time. "But boys like that usually get bored eventually." The sentence landed strangely. Not openly cruel. Not enough to confront directly. Just unpleasant enough to stay with me afterward. That became Vanessa's specialty eventually. Emotional paper cuts. Tiny comments that sounded harmless if repeated aloud later, but somehow left you bleeding internally. A week before spring festival auditions, she convinced me to skip one of my own rehearsals because she claimed she was too overwhelmed to finish a statistics project alone. We stayed up until almost 3 in the morning working through formulas while she kept thanking me quietly and calling me the only person who's ever really been there for me. The next afternoon, I found out she'd gone to lunch with Ethan while I was asleep. Not a date. At least I don't think it was. But she mentioned it casually enough that it felt intentional. "Oh yeah," she said while painting her nails on the floor. "I ran into Ethan near the cafe. We talked for like an hour. He's actually really easy to open up to." Something about the way she said it made me look at her sharply. "What?" She smiled innocently. "Nothing. Relax." Then she changed the subject before I could respond. That night I sat alone in one of the music practice rooms on campus long after rehearsal ended, staring at my reflection in the dark piano lid while trying to understand why I suddenly felt so emotionally tired all the time. Not sad exactly. Just drained. Like every interaction with Vanessa required me to abandon my own instincts in order to preserve peace. And the worst part was that almost nobody else saw it. To everyone around us, Vanessa was sweet, sensitive, grateful. The girl who'd overcome hardship. The girl who adored my family. The girl constantly praising me publicly while quietly repositioning herself inside my life piece by piece. I think that's why manipulation like hers works so well socially. It doesn't isolate you through aggression. It isolates you through confusion. By the time you start recognizing the damage clearly, everyone else already thinks they know the story. And Vanessa was making very sure she got to tell hers first. Spring festival auditions happened on a Thursday night in late April, and by then I had started instinctively bracing myself every time Vanessa entered a room. Not because she was openly cruel. Honestly, if she'd just been openly cruel from the beginning, I probably would have handled everything faster. Open cruelty gives people permission to leave. Vanessa specialized in emotional ambiguity. Every interaction with her carried just enough warmth to make distrust feel irrational. That's what made her exhausting. I was constantly translating her behavior in my head, searching for hidden edges under perfectly normal sentences. The week before auditions, she became strangely supportive of my performance. More supportive than she'd been in months. She helped me pick outfits. Sat through rehearsals without complaining. Even brought me coffee during one late-night practice session while I was working through stage transitions with the lighting team. At one point, she stood near the back row of the empty auditorium, watching me rehearse under dim blue lights while I adjusted my guitar strap for probably the 10th time. "You're going to destroy everybody else," she said softly. I remember laughing nervously. "That sounds violent." "You know what I mean." And weirdly enough, for a few seconds, she sounded sincere again. That was always the dangerous thing about Vanessa. Every time I got close to fully accepting who she was, she'd do something gentle enough to make me question myself all over again. Human beings want consistency from people they care about. We resist evidence that forces us to rewrite somebody completely. Audition night itself was chaos in the way all college events are chaos. Half-organized panic. People carrying extension cords everywhere. Dance teams stretching in hallways. Theater kids emotionally collapsing over eyeliner. I actually started relaxing once things got moving because performing had always been the one place where my brain quieted down. Music gave me somewhere to put feelings that didn't fit neatly into conversation. Ethan was helping coordinate backstage equipment that night. Every once in a while, I'd catch him looking toward me from across the auditorium while talking to someone through his headset, and every single time he noticed me noticing, he'd smile automatically. Small smiles. Quick ones. But real. Vanessa noticed too. Of course she did. About 20 minutes before my audition slot, she disappeared. I didn't think much of it at first because people were moving constantly backstage. Then Chloe walked over holding 2 bottled waters and frowned. "Have you seen your roommate?" I shook my head distractedly while retuning my guitar. "Probably wandering around somewhere." Chloe hesitated. "I think she's crying." That pulled my attention immediately. "What?" "She was near the loading dock talking to Ethan a few minutes ago," Chloe said carefully. I only saw them for like 10 seconds, but she looked upset. A familiar heaviness settled into my stomach. Not panic exactly. More like dread. The kind that arrives when your body recognizes a pattern before your mind fully catches up. I found Vanessa sitting alone on the floor near one of the backstage stairwells, hugging her knees dramatically while mascara streaked lightly beneath her eyes. The second she saw me, she wiped her face quickly and smiled in that embarrassed, fragile way she'd perfected months ago. "Oh my God," she laughed softly. "Ignore me. I'm being stupid." I leaned against the wall, already tired. "What happened?" "Nothing." "Vanessa." She looked down immediately. "I just got overwhelmed. Everyone here is so talented and confident, and I feel like I'm barely holding myself together lately." There it was again. The emotional gravity shift. Somehow every major moment in my life eventually became about stabilizing Vanessa emotionally. I sat beside her because despite everything, I still wasn't heartless. "You don't need to compare yourself to everybody." She laughed quietly without looking at me. "Easy for you to say." "Why?" "Because people actually see you." Something about the way she said that made me glance sideways at her. For a second her expression looked different. Not sad. Not vulnerable. Angry maybe. Or resentful. Then it vanished so quickly I almost convinced myself I imagined it. "You should go," she said suddenly. "You're about to perform." I stood slowly. "Are you okay?" She smiled up at me. "Always." That answer stayed with me longer than it should have. My audition went well enough that several people from the music department asked me to stay afterward and discuss performing during the actual festival showcase in 2 weeks. Ethan looked genuinely excited when they confirmed it. "I told you," he grinned afterward while helping me carry equipment off stage. "You were unreal up there." I felt warm all over hearing him say it. Vanessa appeared beside us almost immediately. She was incredible, she agreed softly, but her eyes stayed on Ethan when she said it. I started noticing things after that. Not dramatic things. Tiny things. Vanessa texting constantly whenever Ethan and I spent time together. Vanessa somehow showing up wherever we were. Vanessa mentioning him casually during conversations where he had nothing to do with anything. Once she interrupted a FaceTime call with my mother just to ask whether Ethan had ever met my family before because he seems like the kind of guy parents love. My mother laughed and said he sounded sweet. Vanessa smiled strangely after that. Then came the jacket incident. It sounds ridiculous calling it an incident now, but small moments become important later when you realize they were testing boundaries. Ethan had left his denim jacket backstage after rehearsal one night and texted me asking if I could grab it before the auditorium locked up. I brought it back to the dorm and tossed it over my chair, planning to return it the next morning. When I got out of the shower later that night, Vanessa was wearing it. She stood in front of our mirror adjusting the sleeves casually like it belonged to her. I stopped walking. She looked at my reflection in the mirror. "What?" "That's Ethan's." "I know." She shrugged lightly. "It was on your chair." I stared at her for several seconds, waiting for her to laugh or apologize or acknowledge how weird the situation was. She didn't. Then she smiled faintly. "It smells like him." I actually felt my skin go cold. "Take it off," I said quietly. Something flickered across her face then. Fast. Irritation maybe. But she pulled the jacket off slowly and tossed it onto my bed. "Relax," she laughed. "You act like I stole your husband." That should have been the moment I finally exploded. Instead, I picked up the jacket and left the room because by then arguing with Vanessa felt like trying to hold smoke in your hands. Every confrontation somehow ended with me feeling irrational and her looking wounded. I started spending more time outside the dorm after that. Longer rehearsals, extra study sessions, random coffee runs that stretched into hours. Ethan noticed eventually. "You okay?" he asked one night while we sat cross-legged on the auditorium stage eating vending machine snacks after rehearsal. I hesitated too long. "That bad?" he asked gently. I looked out across the empty rows of seats glowing dimly under work lights. Do you ever meet someone and slowly realize they're not the person you thought they were? Ethan went quiet beside me. Then he said something that made my chest tighten immediately. "Are we talking about Vanessa?" I turned toward him sharply. "Why would you say that?" He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly uncomfortable. "Because she says weird things sometimes." "What kind of weird things?" He hesitated. "I don't want to start drama." "You're not." Another pause. Then he sighed quietly. "Sometimes it feels like she's competing with you without you realizing there's a competition happening." The sentence landed with terrifying precision because that was exactly how it felt. "She talks about you constantly," he continued carefully. "But not in a normal roommate way. More like," he stopped himself. "More like what?" He looked uncomfortable meeting my eyes. "Like she's trying to figure out why people love you." I didn't speak for several seconds. Because suddenly dozens of memories rearranged themselves again. Vanessa studying my family photos, copying my clothes, asking deeply personal questions about my childhood, mimicking my speech patterns, inserting herself into my relationships slowly enough that I barely noticed it happening. "She thinks everyone likes me more than her," I said quietly. Ethan frowned slightly. "Do they?" I laughed softly at that because it was such a strangely honest answer. "I don't know anymore." Festival week arrived faster than expected. Campus transformed overnight the way colleges always do before major events. Stages everywhere. Food trucks. Student organizations setting up booths across the quad. Music blasting from speakers badly balanced by exhausted tech crews. The entire atmosphere felt electric and overstimulated and weirdly emotional because everybody was close enough to summer break that friendships and relationships suddenly felt temporary in a way they hadn't before. Vanessa became almost unbearably attentive during those days, bringing me tea during rehearsals, helping steam my performance outfit, sitting through soundcheck smiling proudly from the audience seats while I adjusted microphone levels. More than once I caught people commenting on how sweet our friendship was. Friendship. The word started sounding distorted in my head whenever people used it about us. 2 nights before the showcase, I came back to the dorm unexpectedly early because rehearsal got canceled after a lighting malfunction. Vanessa didn't hear me enter. She was sitting at her desk laughing quietly while scrolling through something on her laptop. Then I heard my mother's voice. I froze. Vanessa was on FaceTime with my family. Not with me there. Not accidentally. Alone. My mother was telling some story about Tyler getting suspended in middle school for throwing yogurt at another kid during lunch. Vanessa laughed warmly like she belonged there. Like this was normal. Then my mother said something that made my entire body go still. You know her better than anybody right now. Vanessa smiled softly at the screen. Sometimes I think I do. I stepped backward before she saw me. I don't know how long I stood outside the dorm room after that. Maybe 5 minutes. Maybe 20. Long enough for something ugly and undeniable to finally settle fully inside me. She wasn't just attached to my life. She was replacing me inside pieces of it. And somehow everyone around us had accepted it gradually enough that nobody realized how strange it actually was. That night, I barely spoke to her. She noticed immediately. You seem off lately, she said quietly while brushing her hair before bed. Just stressed. She studied me through the mirror. You know you can talk to me, right? The irony almost made me laugh. Instead, I climbed into bed and turned away from her. Then she said something softly into the darkness that I still think about sometimes. I worry you're starting to hate me. Not angry. Not defensive. Vulnerable. Like she already knew. Festival night arrived warm and humid with the entire campus buzzing from alcohol, adrenaline, and too many people packed into too little space. The showcase auditorium was overflowing by the time performers started rotating through rehearsals backstage. I should have been nervous about the performance itself, but weirdly I wasn't. Music still felt safe. It was one of the only places Vanessa had never managed to destabilize completely. Ethan found me about 30 minutes before showtime while I was adjusting cables near the stage entrance. You ready? He asked. I smiled nervously. Ask me again in an hour. He laughed softly and handed me a bottled water. You're going to kill it. Then he hesitated. There's something I've been meaning to ask you after tonight, he admitted. My stomach flipped instantly. Before I could answer, somebody called his name from across backstage, and he groaned dramatically. Don't disappear after your set, he said quickly before jogging off toward the sound booth. I stood there for several seconds afterward, trying very hard not to smile too obviously. Vanessa appeared beside me almost immediately. He likes you, she said quietly. I glanced at her. Maybe. She nodded slowly while watching Ethan disappear into the crowd. Her expression looked unreadable under the shifting backstage lights. Then she smiled. You deserve that. Something about the sentence unsettled me even though it sounded kind. By the time my performance slot arrived, the auditorium had become almost deafening. Hundreds of students packed shoulder to shoulder beneath flashing stage lights, while performers rotated backstage trying not to panic visibly. I remember standing in the wings gripping my guitar so tightly my fingers hurt while the MC announced my name to the crowd. Then people started cheering. Really cheering. Not polite applause. Actual screaming. For a second, everything else disappeared. Vanessa. The confusion. The exhaustion. Months of emotional tension compressing inside my chest. None of it mattered once I stepped onto the stage. The lights were blinding at first. I could barely see the audience beyond silhouettes and phone flashlights. Then the music started and muscle memory took over. My body relaxed into the performance almost immediately. Every note landed clean. Every transition worked. The crowd got louder halfway through the second song, and by the final chorus people were standing near the front rows shouting lyrics back at me. It was the happiest I'd felt in months. Maybe that's why what happened next hurt so badly. Near the end of the final song, I looked toward backstage, instinctively searching for Ethan. And found Vanessa instead. She was standing near the curtain with her hands tangled in the front of Ethan's shirt while kissing him hard enough that several people nearby had turned to look. But that wasn't the part one remember most clearly. The part one remember most clearly was her eyes. Because she wasn't looking at him. She was looking directly at me. And smiling slightly against his mouth like she'd been waiting for me to see it. I missed the next lyric completely. The audience probably thought it was intentional because the band covered smoothly, but inside my head something collapsed violently all at once. Not just heartbreak. Recognition. Sudden horrible recognition. Every conversation. Every copied mannerism. Every manipulation. Every tiny emotional cut designed carefully enough to look accidental. None of it had been random. Vanessa hadn't wanted Ethan. She wanted the moment. She wanted to take something joyful away from me publicly enough that I would remember her standing there every time I thought about this night afterward. And the worst part? It worked. I somehow finished the performance without falling apart visibly. I don't fully remember how. Adrenaline probably. Years of stage training. The crowd erupted when the song ended and people were still clapping while I walked mechanically off stage feeling strangely disconnected from my own body. Ethan pulled away from Vanessa the second he saw me approaching. His face looked confused more than anything else. "What the hell was that?" he asked her immediately. Vanessa laughed softly like everyone else was overreacting. "Relax." I stared at both of them without speaking. Then Vanessa smiled at me. "And in the calmest voice imaginable," she said, "you were amazing out there." For a second, nobody moved. The crowd outside the backstage curtains was still roaring loudly enough that the floor vibrated beneath my shoes, but backstage itself had gone strangely quiet around us. Ethan looked stunned. Not guilty exactly. More blindsided than anything else. Vanessa, meanwhile, looked perfectly calm. That was the part that finally scared me. Not the kiss itself. The calmness afterward. Like she had completed something she'd planned carefully enough that the outcome no longer mattered. "What the hell was that?" Ethan repeated. Vanessa shrugged lightly and crossed her arms. "A kiss." "You grabbed me," he said immediately. "I thought you were trying to tell me something." She laughed softly. "God, relax. It's not like I proposed." I remember looking at Ethan then and realizing almost instantly that he genuinely hadn't expected it. His confusion looked too real to fake. Vanessa had waited until the exact second his attention shifted toward the stage before pulling him toward her. Not because she wanted him. Because she wanted me watching. That realization settled over me with this strange, horrible clarity. All at once the entire year stopped feeling chaotic and started feeling organized. Vanessa had never moved randomly. Every emotional crisis, every carefully timed vulnerability, every small humiliation disguised as humor. It all followed the same logic. She inserted herself into spaces where I felt secure, then slowly redirected the emotional attention inside those spaces toward herself. And suddenly I was tired. Not angry. Not heartbroken. Just deeply exhausted. "I'm going home," I said quietly. Ethan stepped toward me immediately. "Wait." But Vanessa spoke first. "You're seriously being dramatic right now." Something about the sentence finally snapped whatever instinct I still had to protect her. I looked at her fully then. Really looked at her. And for the first time since meeting her, I stopped searching for softness underneath everything she did. I stopped trying to find the wounded girl inside the performance. What I saw instead was somebody watching me carefully, calculating my reaction in real time. "You did that on purpose," I said. For the first time all night, her expression flickered. Just slightly. Then she smiled again. "You think everything is about you." The line would have worked on me 2 months earlier. Maybe even 2 weeks earlier. But standing there backstage with sweat cooling against my skin after the biggest performance of my college life, something inside me finally stopped bending around her version of reality. "No," I said quietly. "I think everything is about attention to you." That hit harder than I expected it to. Vanessa's face changed instantly. Not dramatically, but enough. The softness disappeared from her eyes for half a second and something colder pushed through instead. Then Ethan spoke again. "Vanessa, what is wrong with you?" And that was the first moment I realized something important about people like her. They can handle one person seeing through them. What destabilizes them is multiple people comparing notes at the same time. I left before either of them could say anything else. The walk back to the dorm felt strangely unreal. Campus was still alive with festival energy everywhere around me. Music echoing between buildings. People laughing in groups under string lights. Somebody running through the quad wearing fairy wings and carrying 2 slices of pizza. Normally, I love nights like that. College always felt temporary in the best possible way during spring festivals. Like, everyone understood subconsciously that these were the memories they'd romanticize later. But all I could think about was Vanessa watching me while she kissed him. Not kissing him. Watching me. That detail replayed in my head over and over until I physically felt sick. When I got back to the dorm, I sat in the dark for almost 20 minutes without turning on the lights. Then I started remembering things. Not emotionally. Logically. Like my brain had finally switched from confusion into pattern recognition. The photos on her phone. The copied clothes. The fake illnesses before deadlines. The FaceTime calls with my family. The comments to Ethan. The way she always positioned herself as emotionally fragile whenever somebody started getting closer to me. And underneath all of it, one realization kept surfacing again and again. Vanessa never tried to become loved directly. She tried to become needed. Around midnight, my phone started exploding with texts. Chloe first. What happened backstage? Then Ethan. Please answer me. Then my mother. Vanessa just called crying. Is everything okay? I actually laughed out loud reading that one. Not because it was funny. Because it was so perfectly predictable that suddenly the entire situation felt grotesque. Of course, she called my mother before I could. Of course she did. That was the game. Control the emotional framing first. I called Ethan instead. He answered immediately. Thank God. What happened? I asked quietly. There was a long pause. Honestly? I don't fully know. I sat back against the wall beside my bed listening to distant music outside the dorm windows. She came up to me while I was checking cables, he continued. She looked upset, so I asked if she was okay. Then she started talking about how she felt invisible all the time and how nobody ever really chose her first, and he stopped. I thought she was having some kind of breakdown. I closed my eyes. Then she grabbed me, he finished quietly. And before I even reacted, you were standing there. The exhaustion in his voice sounded real. I'm sorry, he said after a second. I should have pushed her away faster. It's not your fault. I still feel awful. I believed him. That's the strange thing. I should have been devastated about Ethan specifically, but weirdly I wasn't. Because deep down I think I understood immediately that the kiss had never actually been about him. He was just the sharpest object Vanessa could find to throw at me publicly. She's been saying strange things about you for months, Ethan admitted quietly. I didn't realize how bad it was until tonight. That got my attention immediately. What kind of things? Another pause. Mostly implying you were emotionally manipulative. He sounded uncomfortable even repeating it. Like you needed people to depend on you. For a second, I genuinely couldn't speak. Because that was her strategy exactly. Take the thing she was doing and project it onto me before anyone could identify the real source. She told me once that you panic whenever attention shifts away from you, he said carefully. And honestly, after tonight, he stopped himself. You realized she was describing herself. Yeah. We sat in silence for a few seconds after that. Then Ethan said something softly that stayed with me long afterward. I don't think she wanted me. I think she wanted to win something. After we hung up, I stared at the ceiling for a long time thinking about that sentence. Win something. Not love. Not friendship. Not connection. Victory. Around 1 in the morning, the dorm door opened quietly and Vanessa walked inside carrying her heels in one hand. She froze when she saw me awake. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she sighed dramatically and shut the door behind her. Are we seriously doing this? I stared at her. Doing what? The silent treatment thing. I almost laughed again because the emotional inversion was unbelievable. She genuinely sounded inconvenienced. You kissed him in front of me on purpose. Oh my God, she said immediately, dropping her shoes onto the floor. You're acting like I murdered someone. No, I said quietly. I'm acting like a person whose roommate spent months manipulating everyone around her. That landed harder. Vanessa's expression sharpened slightly. You really think I manipulated people? You called my mother crying before I even got home. Her face went still. Then she laughed softly. She called me first. Why? I don't know, she snapped suddenly. Maybe because your family likes me. There it was. Not sadness. Not guilt. Resentment. I stood slowly. Why are you doing this? Her jaw tightened immediately. Doing what? This. I gestured vaguely between us. Everything. For a second I thought she might actually answer honestly. Something flickered across her face. Exhaustion maybe. Then the mask slid back into place. You always do this, she said quietly. You make yourself the victim in every situation. I stared at her in disbelief. Then she said the sentence that finally destroyed whatever remained of our friendship completely. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is being around someone everyone automatically loves? The room went silent. Not because she yelled it. She didn't. Her voice actually sounded tired more than angry. Like she'd been carrying that resentment quietly for a long time. I looked at her carefully then. And suddenly I understood something I should have realized months earlier. Vanessa genuinely believed I had stolen something from her simply by existing comfortably in spaces where she never felt secure. You think this is about popularity? I asked quietly. You wouldn't get it. Try me. She laughed bitterly and sat down heavily on her bed. You walk into rooms and people immediately relax around you. Professors trust you. Your parents adore you. Ethan looks at you like you're the answer to some question he's been asking himself for years. Her eyes flicked toward mine sharply. Do you know what that's like for somebody who's had to earn every ounce of attention their entire life? I listened without interrupting. Because for the first time all year, she was accidentally telling the truth. You have this, she gestured vaguely, frustrated by her own inability to describe it. Warmth. And people just give things to you because of it. I thought about the assignments I'd written for her, the groceries I'd bought, the nights I'd stayed awake comforting her through invented illnesses. What exactly have people given me that you haven't taken? That hit her hard enough that she looked away immediately. Then she recovered. You're unbelievable, she muttered. No, I said quietly. I was just easy to manipulate. Her eyes snapped back toward mine. And there it was again. That tiny flash of panic whenever somebody named the behavior out loud. The conversation ended after that because Vanessa abruptly started crying. Real tears this time, I think. Or at least partially real. She said she was overwhelmed and tired and didn't know why everybody expected perfection from her all the time. By that point, I almost admired how instinctive the performance had become for her. The second accountability entered the room, vulnerability arrived right behind it to soften the impact. Normally, I would have comforted her. That night I just watched. Eventually, she curled into bed facing the wall without another word. I stayed awake until sunrise listening to her breathing and understanding finally, fully, completely, that I did not know this person at all. The next morning, campus gossip had already exploded. Festival drama spreads through colleges faster than actual emergencies. By breakfast, people were whispering about the backstage kiss. Most versions made me sound jealous and unstable because Vanessa had gotten ahead of the story again. According to several people, she and Ethan had been kind of talking for weeks and I'd overreacted because I assumed he liked me. That should have hurt more than it did. Instead, it just clarified things further. Vanessa couldn't survive emotionally without controlling perception. By afternoon, Chloe stormed into my dorm looking furious. Why is your roommate telling people you screamed at her backstage? I looked up slowly from my laptop. Because she knows I didn't. Chloe stared at me for several seconds. Okay, I need you to explain literally everything right now. So I did. Not emotionally. Just factually. The fake illnesses. The assignments. The family calls. The phone conversation I overheard. The copied clothes. The manipulative comments. Everything. Chloe listened without interrupting once. Then she sat down heavily on my desk chair and whispered, "Holy shit." That reaction mattered more than I expected. Because manipulation isolates people partly by making them doubt their own interpretation of events. Watching someone else finally see the pattern too felt like oxygen entering a room that had been sealed shut for months. You know what the creepiest part is? Chloe said finally. I used to think she worshipped you. I laughed quietly. I think she thought she did too. Over the next few days, more things started surfacing once I stopped protecting Vanessa publicly. Professors mentioning concerns about inconsistencies in medical documentation she'd submitted. Friends quietly admitting she often talked about me in strange passive-aggressive ways when I wasn't around. One girl from our communications class told me Vanessa once described me as emotionally dependent on being admired. Again, projection. Always projection. Then came the photos. I was deleting old rehearsal videos from my phone when I remembered the candid pictures Vanessa had shown my mother at dinner. Something about them bothered me suddenly. Not emotionally. Practically. So I checked our dorm cloud backup. There were hundreds. Not dozens. Hundreds. Photos of me sleeping, studying, practicing guitar, talking on FaceTime with my family, walking across campus from our dorm window. Some taken months earlier without my knowledge. I sat there staring at the screen while cold nausea spread slowly through my chest. Then I noticed folders. One labeled outfits. Another labeled family. Another labeled Ethan. That was the moment the situation stopped feeling merely toxic and started feeling genuinely disturbing. Inside the family folder were screenshots from my mother's Facebook page, old family vacation photos, birthday pictures, even pictures of Tyler. Inside the outfit folder were mirror selfies of Vanessa recreating combinations almost identical to mine. Inside the Ethan folder were screenshots of his social media posts going back nearly a year. I physically had to close the laptop for a minute because suddenly I couldn't breathe properly. The worst part wasn't even the invasion itself. It was realizing how long it must have been happening while I kept defending her to myself. That night I called my mother and told her everything. Not dramatically. Calmly. At first she resisted instinctively. Not because she didn't believe me, but because kind people struggle accepting that somebody manipulated their kindness intentionally. Then I mentioned the folders. Silence. Finally, my mother spoke quietly. "Honey, that isn't normal." "No," I said. "It isn't." Another long pause. Then, very softly, "I'm sorry I didn't see it." That almost made me cry. Not because she'd done anything wrong. Because it was the first time in months someone acknowledged that something real had happened to me instead of asking me to manage Vanessa's emotions first. 2 nights later, Ethan came over unexpectedly carrying takeout containers and looking nervous. "I figured you probably forgot to eat again," he said awkwardly. I let him in. We sat cross-legged on the dorm floor while Vanessa stayed mysteriously absent for almost 4 hours straight, which honestly told me she probably already knew he was there somehow. "I'd keep replaying that night," Ethan admitted after a while. "And the more I think about it, the more unsettling it gets." I nodded quietly. "She watched you the entire time," he said. "Yeah." He looked down at his hands. "I don't think I was even part of the moment to her." "No," I said softly. "You weren't." And somehow that was sadder than if she'd actually wanted him. Because at least genuine attraction would have been human. What Vanessa wanted wasn't connection. It was emotional replacement. She wanted to step into spaces where I felt safe and prove she could redirect the affection there toward herself instead. Before Ethan left that night, he hesitated near the door. Then he asked quietly, "Why didn't you expose her earlier?" I thought about that for a long time after he left. Because the honest answer wasn't simple. Part of it was guilt. Part of it was confusion. Part of it was the exhausting reality that emotionally manipulative people rarely look monstrous from the outside. Mostly though, I think I kept hoping if I loved her correctly enough, she'd eventually stop treating my life like something she needed to conquer. But some people don't know how to receive love without turning it into competition first. And Vanessa had been competing with me from the moment we met.